Welcome to the September 3rd, 2024 City Council meeting. I hereby call the meeting to order. Members of the public may attend this City Council meeting in person or may watch and listen remotely by viewing the meeting on Channel 8 WCTV and at the city's website at www.wayzata.org/WCTV. Public comment during the public forum and/or public hearing portions of the meeting may be provided in person at the meeting, in advance, or by logging into the Zoom call and raising your hand during the public hearing. When your name is called in the meeting, you will be seen and heard in our council chambers and the cable channel. You will be asked to unmute, and then you may begin your comment. All public comments must include your full name and address. The second item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. If I could ask everyone to stand and follow along. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on the agenda is the roll call. Please note that all are present with the exception of our mayor, who had an excused absent tonight. The next item is to approve the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as is, or does anyone want to make any changes?
I'll move to approve the agenda as outlined.
And a second?
Second that motion.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. The next item is public forum. Just a reminder for those members of the public in attendance tonight and are interested in speaking, please state your name, address, indicate if you are representing a group, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. If the item you wish to speak about is something that is on the agenda, for those that are in person, please fill out a form at the table and hand it to staff. For those that are watching via Zoom, please send a note via chat to staff and let them know what agenda item you wish to speak about. We also require that your camera is turned on when you speak. The first item on public forum is update of Lake Minnetonka Conservation District activities by Wayzata Representative Matthew Thompson. Deputy City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Plekish. Can I have Matthew Thompson come up to the dais and give the update to the City Council? Oh, I think he was here.
Don't see him.
Is he on Zoom?
No, he's not.
Okay, well, we'll table that for the moment. If he comes in later, maybe we'll
Yeah.
get it at the back end.
Yep.
Item number 6 is new agenda items. Council, does anyone have any
Sorry,
new agenda
excuse me,
items?
Mayor Pro Tem. We did have another item under
did.
public forum. The second item is an
Oh, I see it, okay.
Yep.
Update of Parks and Trails Board by Chair Tony Schalkel. I know he's here, I saw him.
Thank you, council and staff. So for those new, hi, I'm Tori Schockel, Chair of the Parks and Trails Board. And a few quick updates from kind of the last 6-ish months. The first is the Bell Courts court and the middle school courts have been done, meaning we converted one of the tennis courts into about 4 pickleball courts, moved the bocce courts over. As part of the construction, we got about a $100,000 grant from both Hennepin County, from Tennis Association. We also got part of it funded by the school because we have a partnership with them. Pickleball courts have been extremely well received and highly used, and we continue to welcome any feedback from the community on that. Second item, Summer Community Ed. So as a reminder, we have a partnership with Wayzata School District to offer community education classes. We partner with them to figure out what to offer. They do the marketing, et cetera. This year we had about 700 people participate in just those summer events. We'll be partnering with them for winter activities as well. Music in the Park just wrapped up. We had about 1,000 attendees across the month. Amazing weather, and continue to try and be resourceful with that. It comes out to about $5 kind of per person who attends. A quick plug for those of you at the ribbon cutting ceremony. There was Duffy Boats. That was kind of that boat that was offering free tours across the lake. Seemed to be very well received. A friendly reminder, that is the that's the organization we're trying to partner with for consideration with the dock. So in other words, could we in the future convert one of the slips, maybe 2 of the slips, to be kind of a public dock where those Duffy boats could be rented out by the community and try and kind of democratize our greatest asset of the lake for visitors, for those who may not have a boat, et cetera. That would be what that experience would be like. And then two final things, Clapbridge updates. So we are in the process of the planning for Clapbridge. As a friendly reminder, especially for those new, about 3 years ago, there was an approval from council of the budget and the broad plans for Clapbridge. And then an encouragement about a year ago for us to think more broadly about what that design could look like. So we're in the process of that. So there's this kind of urgency and delay to the updates needed there. Our biggest request to council is continued alignment. So if there's any better way we can give you an update on what the plans are, or for any of you to come join us at the meetings or stay updated there so we can avoid last minute surprises, we would welcome it. And then finally, we're ramping up for winter and spring activities, including community education, including what can be offered at Clapbridge, maple tree tapping, et cetera. So that's us on behalf of Parks and Trails. Any questions for us? Suggestions? Oh, sorry, the one final thing I should add. We tried to engage the community with more feedback from the user experience by having signs where people could scan, give us feedback while they were at the park. In short, we didn't receive a ton of communication and they became eyesores, so we've taken that signage down. But we had tried, it was all in the spirit of trying to create a better user experience and get better user feedback at the moment.
Council, any questions?
Yeah, a lot of work.
I have a question and a comment. Did you have anything?
I just have one comment. Sure. I was intrigued by your comment about potential of maybe making one of the docks in public and have boat rides. I think that would be very well received and encourage you to look at that further.
Sorry, can you say that part again?
I said, I was encouraged by your comments about the public docks having a spot for some agency to give boat rides across the lake, et cetera. I just think that's a really good idea. I would encourage you to run that to ground.
Got it, thanks.
Okay, the comment I've got is that the pickleball courts, I had an opportunity to see those firsthand at the All-City Staff Picnic a week or two ago, and I was amazed at how good it is. Really well done. Seemed like there was a lot of energy there. So anybody is in the community that hasn't done pickleball, and I have not, I think maybe my knees wouldn't take it, but if you're interested in pickleball, if you played it, you ought to check it out. It's pretty good. And the question I've got for you is on those QR code surveys that were all around, I think at all the parks, weren't they?
Yep.
Do you have it handy? How many responses do we actually get?
Nick would know over the course of a year, I want to say less than 20 or so. Yeah.
Do we need to promote it again?
Sorry, the QR code's literally in the park?
Yeah.
Is that the one? We could. Our thought was it's right there, so if you had any feedback, you could use it, and people, either our park experience is that amazing, or people are that busy, or a combination, I'm not sure, but perhaps.
Did you learn anything?
Frankly, the bigger ways we learn is like with Clapbridge, we have a lot of open houses with the local community. I think that's been better. I can't think of any big aha we had from the QR codes. Yeah.
All right. Any other comments or questions?
Just another comment on the pickleball courts, that they are so well received and being used a lot. And just chatted with a neighbor a couple doors down from them this morning, and they wanted me to mention that the noise is not bothersome at all, and they're
That was my biggest
thrilled
worry.
to
Good,
hear
okay.
that. So they're always busy, they're always being used, and it's been a great addition to the neighborhood.
Thanks for that comment. And one thing we still need to do there is add a signage regarding rules and regarding the hours for it. So we're going to look at buying one of those. So.
Yeah, someone asked me the other day if there was a place where you could go and look to see if the courts were open or if they were reserved for some sort of lessons, and I didn't know if that was.
There is. It's through an app, but that'd be a good thing to think about adding to that sign.
Yeah.
That's a good call.
That's a great thing to add to the sign, and maybe put that in our Wayzata weekly newsletter.
Good point.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Deputy City Manager, do we have anyone on Zoom?
Mayor Pro Tem, we do, but they haven't indicated that they would like to comment.
All right. The next item is number 6, new agenda items. Council, does anyone have any new agenda items to discuss or bring up now or in the future? No? Okay. The next item is the approval of the consent agenda. I will read through there. It's a long consent agenda, so please bear with me. Item A, approval of city council workshop and regular meeting minutes of August 20th, 2024. B, approval of check register. C, approval of municipal licenses. D, approval of master services agreement with WSB. E, approval of the development agreement for Westway condominiums at 201 Lake Street East. Item F, approval of second reading and adoption of ordinance 839 approving PUD amendment for Wayzata Executive Park at 1903 through 1907 Wayzata Boulevard East. Item G, acceptance of Polly Anderson resignation from the Energy and Environment Committee. Item H, award of contract to Quality Flow Systems for Lift Station Number 6 Rehabilitation Project. Similarly, item I, award of contract to Quality Flow Systems for Lift Station Number 10 Rehabilitation Project. Item J, award of contract to Prairie Restoration for Little Woods Management Project. Item K, approval of WSB proposal for engineering services related to Grove Lane Expansion Project. Item L, approval of 2024 Sidewalk Cafe permit for Eloise Restaurant at 332 Broadway Avenue South. So, council, are there any questions, anything you'd like to pull or comment on?
Mayor Pro Tem Plekish, I've got 3 items I'd like to make just a quick comment about or a quick question. The first one is item B as in Bravo, approval of check register. And there was one item under lakefront improvements, a check for 1.61 million. And my question is, what is that for? It's to J.F. Brennan Company.
Thank you, Councilmember Sorensen, Mayor Pro Tem, for the question. So that's related to the Panaway Phase 2, the Lake Walk and Docks. That's one of the hired contractors for that contract. So even though it's open, it typically takes several months before we completely close out that project.
So is that the contractor who built the docks? Mm-hmm. Okay. That was my question.
Yep.
So the next one would be item E as in Echo, approval of development agreement for West Bay condominiums at 201 Lake Street. And my only comment or question was, I see it included a donation of $220,000 to the city parks and trails. So my question is, how does that amount come about? Is that a negotiation as part of the development agreement, or what's the origin of that?
That's a great question, Councilmember Sorensen. I'm not involved in the development agreement. David, do you know how that process came about?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, Council Member, and Deputy City Manager. I was not involved in the calculation of that amount. My understanding was a negotiation between the developer and the city in recognition of, with a PUD, we want to see some public benefit to that. And this is something that the developer offered up voluntarily to kind of contribute to the overall public benefit of the project. So I think it's a voluntary thing, a subject of negotiation.
Okay, thank you. Last one is item L, approval of 2024 sidewalk cafe permit for Eloise Restaurant. And my only question was, I see the fee for that is $815. And I know tonight isn't about the fee, but is that fee a fixed fee for all issues like this, or is it, or what's the origin of the fee?
That's a great question, Councilmember Sorensen. So according to our fee schedule, it is a flat fee first for like the initial permit application and a different fee for just renewals, but it's currently set as a flat fee for anyone who wants to apply for that.
And there might be discussions underway on how we might do that differently in the future.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. At one of a council workshop, there's been questions about should that be based more off of square footage instead of a flat fee. So that's something we're looking into, but don't have a recommendation for at this time.
Yeah, okay, that's very helpful, thank you.
Is that it?
Yep.
Anyone else?
Yes. Mayor Pro Tem, I'd like to pull item K for further discussion and a separate vote.
All right, we'll take that at the end. Anything else?
That's it.
Anybody? There's a few things I'd like to comment on, not to pull necessarily. Item G, acceptance of Polly Anderson resignation from the Energy Environment Committee. All I wanted to say, and I hope she's listening here, is I wanted to call her out as someone that we really appreciate for all the work she's done. I know she's been around for a long time, very active, very passionate about these things. I'm sure she's going to be missed on that commission or that committee. Secondly is the Prairie Restoration of Little Woods Management Project. Let me pull that up here. Give me a second to get to it. So, I don't know, I'm probably not alone, but I didn't know there was a Little Woods in Wayzata. Everybody knows about the big woods, but I didn't know there was a Little Woods, but apparently there is, not very far from here. I wanted to call this out because one of the people that was mentioned in our packet was Henry Miles, who apparently voluntarily has maintained that area and done all kinds of things on his own without any prompting whatsoever. So again, I don't want this thing just to pass through as a consent agenda without calling him out and saying we really appreciate all the work that he's done for the city. And lastly is I wanted to comment on item K, but we're pulling it, so I'll reserve my comments till later. Okay, with that, is there any other comment? Anything else anybody wants to pull? So I'd like a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented with the exception of item K, which we'll pull and discuss separately.
I would make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So do we do K now, or do we wait till later in the?
We can handle
now?
it now if you'd prefer to. Yep.
Okay, so why don't we discuss that now and pull it up? Councilmember Parkhill, if you would like to introduce this is why it's being pulled and
Yeah.
go into discussion.
Well, I guess this has been on the CIP for a while, and I didn't know that it was there specifically, or I didn't really know what it was for. So now I know what it's for, and I guess my question is, why are we doing this? Why are we creating a two-way on Grove Street when it's a very nice one-way, calm, quiet? Why are we spending $58,000 on engineering, plus I'm guessing another $500,000 on road work? We have plenty of demands on our capital in the community. For example, we need a sidewalk on the east side of Clapbridge Park. Seems like maybe something like that. We also have not fully funded Clapbridge Park. Don't know if it can be used for that, but I'm sure there's another, street light that could be replaced also. So I don't think the neighbors have been considered. I know there has been speeding and noise issues there in history. I don't know when that was done. I think it was in 2001 or something. I don't think there's anything wrong with the way it's set up now. Also, the bikers have parking spots down there in that parking lot. It seems to be a natural, safe way to come off of the Dakota Trail and come right across the street and come down Grove Lane and hit their parking spots as opposed to going down Lake Street and then over the railroad tracks and back. So I think it's a safe way to get into the parking lot. So those are my concerns, and the biggest concern is the $500,000 we're spending, because I don't know that we need to do that.
Staff, any comment?
Sure, I can chime in on a couple of those items. I did have some time before this meeting to discuss this project with Director Kelly, and I think from what I've heard from the council is maybe not enough discussion before this item came to you on what the project is, the need for it, things like that. So I'll provide as much background as I can and then answer any other questions that you have. So back in 2008, this did used to be a two-way street. It was narrowed in 2008 to accommodate putting the Dakota Rail Regional Trail. So it had to go to one way because it's not wide enough with the trail and the road for two-way traffic. Now that the Dakota Rail Regional Trail gets directed back onto Lake Street through Panaway, It's not really needed here any longer in the same way that it was before. So I believe Director Kelly mentioned that it's been talked about on and off for about 10 years, but maybe not as recently for this council. I would say one of the main benefits of this project is just some safety improvements from having two-way traffic. This project primarily would take place just on the southern part of the road. That's where it would basically cut 4 feet into what is the existing trail, leave 8 feet kind of as just a paved trail to the south of it, and make the street 20 feet going 2 directions. So primarily the impact is just by taking away part of the trail to make it wide enough for two-way traffic. It would then also put a curb on the northern side. If you notice now, there's not currently curb on that side of the street. So that's kind of the scope of the project, I would say, just in that kind of one area along Grove Lane. I can't really speak to the background much further than that. I'd say if the council is interested in having kind of more history and discussing the project in general, I'd recommend we table this item and talk about it a little bit more, either for the formal presentation on the background and its full scope, or if kind of this explanation on how wide it would be, where it's taking it from, is enough to give you confidence to move forward with just the design portion. This would then have to come back for the council to authorize for bids. So this doesn't give the project just the full-on go-ahead. The other thing I would comment on in terms of the funding resources, so we're proposing to pay for this design work out of TIF 5, so we couldn't say reallocate those dollars and pay for Clapbridge Park with it. It's really for like street and utility type other public improvements. It could not be used for parks. Not saying it couldn't, then we couldn't identify another purpose for it, but just wanted to comment that we couldn't say just reallocate those resources to Clapbridge.
Okay. Well, if anybody doesn't, I don't think we should make this decision tonight to spend $58,000, but I'm just one vote here.
Well, I will tell you, I wasn't prepared to pull it in my mind. I was going to make a comment about it, which actually plays into your feelings here. And the comment I was going to make is this was a surprise to me. Not necessarily a negative surprise, but a surprise nonetheless. I didn't know that the city was planning to turn it back into a two-way. So some of the questions I would have is, have the neighbors along that street been contacted, and what has been their feedback? We don't know that. It wasn't in our packet. So unless I have resistance from the other two council members, my feeling is perhaps we should pull this and get a little bit more information and vote on it later. How does everyone else feel about that?
I felt similarly when I read through this packet as well, that this felt a bit of a surprise, and I wondered about the surrounding neighborhood as well. So I would be perfectly comfortable with tabling this item, Mayor Pro Tem, and digging in a little further.
Okay, well, that's what we'll do then. Staff, you could just come back later with some
Yeah.
information,
I was going to say, I think we need a formal motion to table this.
right? Well, then I will accept the motion to table this.
I would like to make a formal motion to table this.
In a second,
I'll second.
all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Staff? Okay, next item is 8A, is to consider adoption of Resolution 37-2024 for amendments to conditional use permits for Eloise Restaurant parking at 332 Broadway Avenue South. Deputy City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I will turn it over to Assistant Planner Quarles to make the presentation.
All right, good evening, everybody. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a couple of conditional use permits over at Eloise Restaurant. The owner of the building is Belts Enterprises LLC, and the team is Lindsay Polad, the restaurateur, and Gary Gabrielson, who's been their representative throughout this process. The project is located right in the middle of downtown on Lake Street, at the corner of Broadway and Lake, so just down the hill. The parcel is zoned PUD, which we'll get into a little bit later, and like a lot of the parcels around it, is guided central business district. For a little bit of history on this site, it was initially redeveloped in the early 2000s with that L-shaped building you can see in the top image. It was developed as a PUD. It didn't provide any on-site parking at the time. They paid a fee, and it did include a public walkway. I note the public walkway just because it impacted the fee they paid at the time. And the building has a mixture of uses, office and retail. In the late 2010s, there was an addition to the building. You can see they filled in that L to the north called Broadway Place. This was achieved through a PUD amendment. This also had no on-site parking. They had a joint use of parking conditional use permit and a fee paid called fee in lieu of parking, which we'll talk about a lot today. And this building also had a mixture of uses, office on the second and third floors, and then retail and restaurant on the first floor. You don't have to look at this whole table, but just to explain a little bit about how joint use of parking works, it basically says that different uses require more or less parking at different times of the day. For an example, office uses need more parking during the workday, during the 9 to 5, versus something like housing would need more parking at night when everybody's at home. And so the idea is that if you look at all of the uses in a mixed-use building or on a mixed-use property, you can see that there can be some sharing of parking that's going on because different uses peak at different times. What this means, instead of having to provide peak parking for everybody all of the time, you can provide a little less parking overall because of that sharing that's going on. And then the off-site mention is just that sometimes that parking is provided on the property and it's shared among uses, and sometimes that parking is provided off-site. The table is just to show how those different uses peak at different times of day. That's the table that's in our code. It's a standard table that we use every time, and it specifically has these times of day built in there. Fee in lieu of parking is the other component of this discussion. With the CUP, properties downtown can apply to use public parking for their required parking demand instead of providing their own on-site. This is a really powerful tool in our downtown because it means that not every single building needs to have a parking lot. We recognize that street parking and public parking are a really important part of how we have a vibrant street front instead of having to focus so much on parking at each individual business. When you buy into the file-out program, there's no specific space that's reserved, but the property does pay a one-time fee per parking space. In 2024, this is $10,000 per space. That fee goes towards maintaining our public parking, building more public parking if we need it, and we'll talk a little bit about parking studies in a minute. That's also what pays for that, is that file-op, as we call it. And then whenever you apply for file-op, you have to look at all of the existing public parking in the specific area around the development to make sure that there's enough capacity available within that public parking. If it's full up, we can't hand out more public parking if it's not there. So for this specific application, this is a restaurant that's in the old Lululemon space that currently has a building permit. It requires 21 parking spaces at the most, less during some parts of the day or week under that existing joint parking CUP. I mention that because that CUP applies to the entire building, kind of no matter what's in those spaces, so we can redo that calculation when the uses change, which I'll get into in a moment. That restaurant is currently building out. It's anticipated to open, I think, in about a month. And under the existing joint parking CUP, which is the arrangement the entire building has to share all their parking, they can open after 6 p.m. on weekdays and be open all weekend without any additional entitlement. So the proposal is to allow LOEs to open before 6 p.m. on weekdays. So the requests involved in that are an amendment to the existing off-site joint use of parking CUP to add spaces, and similarly an amendment to the existing fee in lieu of parking CUP to pay for those additional spaces. When we calculate parking demand, we look at what the property is entitled to in total. So what file-op is they've essentially purchased their peak demand, which is 92 spaces, during the day, during the week. That's the busiest time, and that's primarily driven by the office use on site because that's so much of their square footage. This means that there's not additional room under their current CUP without adding additional spaces. So when we calculate out the spaces, we look at what's the difference between the current retail space, Lululemon, and the future restaurant space. During this period, it rounds up to about 10 additional spaces. And just to reiterate, as I mentioned before, at any other time of the day or the week other than daytime during the week, there's room because that office use goes away. It's primarily because that office use is there that there's not additional parking under the current CUP. So what that means is that opening before 6 represents an increase in demand of 10 spaces during the time the building is already at its maximum demand. That maximum demand is 92 spaces. The request is to add 10 to get that to 102. Similarly, for the file-up, they're already paying for 92, and they need to increase to 102 in order to account for that demand. We have a pretty straightforward set of criteria when looking at both of these CUPs, basically saying, you know, you're using off-site parking, you're using public parking. Let's look at our parking study and see if there's enough public parking to account for that extra demand. Our 2022 parking study is the most current, and it says that yes, within 300 feet, there's enough room. We have preliminary results from 2024 right now for these specific zones in the Mill Street ramp. They are pretty similar so far. I don't know about the rest of downtown yet, but we did ask to see if we could get that data in advance, and it is looking like that capacity is pretty similar. So that capacity is still there. When the Planning Commission reviewed it, they agreed that the parking facilities nearby were going to be able to absorb that. They also found that the action was compatible with the comp plan, present and future uses, and would have a positive effect on the area in terms of enabling this restaurant to be open a little bit earlier during the day. So the proposed motion is to adopt Resolution 37-2024 for amendments to CUPs for Eloise Restaurant at 332 Broadway Avenue South. And I'm sure there are questions, and I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
All right, Council, any questions for staff?
So my understanding, Planner Quarles, is from 5 to 6 o'clock, we're talking 1 hour for 7 days a week. That's the problem we're dealing with, is they need the CUP for 1 hour per day for 7 days.
Yes, Councilmember Parkhill. And the reason is that if you look at this table, we specifically break up our times of day into those blocks. So daytime goes all the way from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Yep.
If they get this entitlement, they'll be allowed to open anytime between 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. They're just specifically saying we'd like to open at 5. So if in the future they wanted to be open any earlier, they are entitled to the whole block of time.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, when is the fee paid?
So the fee can be paid in 2 ways under our file-out policy. It can either be at the time that the CUP is approved, or it can be over a period of time under our file-out policy. Under the policy, it can be over a period of 10 years with interest. The applicant is opting to go for the longer time frame, and that is specifically one of the things that council is approving. If you look in the cover memo specifically, you're approving that they can take this extended period of time to pay that amount of money.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember, I just want to note for the record too, it looks like the resolution that got into the packet didn't pick up that additional detail about financing. The applicant did request to pay all fee in lieu of parking fees over time in the manner of an assessment with a term of 10 years, and that will be an interest rate equivalent to the prime interest rate plus 2%. That's all from our policy, so we really can't play around with that or anything. But I just want to note for the record that that was requested by the applicant, and as Planner Qualis noted, as you approve these CUPs, that will be made part of your approval this evening.
Any other questions? I've got a couple here. So the file-op program, as I recall, is fairly new in Wayzata history. Is that right? Like maybe 4 or 5 years old? No?
We amended the policy a couple of years ago, but I believe it dates back a bit further than that.
Okay. That kind of leads me to the question is, theoretically, when a new establishment comes into play and they don't have the ability to build parking to satisfy their need, then we ask for a fee to kind of reserve an amorphous parking spot somewhere, which is either in the garage or along Mill Street. Is that correct? Or maybe on the street, too?
Yes, for this particular establishment, it would be Mill Street or the ramp. For other places in what we call the downtown mobility district, that could be anywhere else sort of along Lake Street.
So I don't know if you're prepared to answer this. I'm not trying to do anything special here, but I'm curious. Do we know how many parking spots are actually available for file-op, generally speaking? And how many of those have already been spoken for by people having paid the file-op?
That would be a good, I think there's a couple of different ways you can look at that. I think you can look theoretically at the number of spaces that have been spoken for. I think that a more accurate way to look at it is the number of spaces that are actually being used. You know, parking demand is always a calculation, but it's not perfect. You know, sometimes a business is really popular, or sometimes, you know, it sort of brings a different type of vehicle traffic. I think that using the parking study and seeing how many spaces we actually have left to distribute is probably more accurate than saying, you know, we have X number of spaces in general and X number are spoken for, just because those might be at different times of day, in different parts of Lake Street, that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Well, it kind of does. I know that when we have weekends with special events like James G. Hill Days is coming up and so on, that the parking garage is full, you know, regardless of what else might be going on. So there are moments over the course of the year where we really don't have the capacity. I'm not so worried about that. That happens routinely in other cities too. But conceptually, we could run out of spaces, am I right? If we had very many restaurants open up or whatever, and we have a fixed number of parking spots, we could conceivably get to a brick wall, so to speak, and we can't give out any more. Are we tracking that so we know when we hit that brick wall?
We're not tracking it in terms of how many spaces we've given out to each project. I would say that that number is definitely far under our capacity right now. I would say that the parking study is probably the best way to track that, and because one of those criteria is there enough off-site parking within 300 feet? If the answer to that question is no, we can't give out a CUP for that use. So that is built into the CUP criteria to review the data, say, is there space? And if there isn't, we can't give it out.
Okay.
We just haven't run into that yet.
Any other questions for staff?
I've got one more. Planning Course, could you remind the council and the public what they're studying? I mean, obviously in the parking study, they're studying available parking spots, but give people a kind of a rundown of when and where so that we can feel assured that the parking is actually available.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will note that the parking study does always come up for council approval as well, so those prior parking studies can be found in prior packets. I think that this slide is probably a good example. I pulled 2 times of the day and week that are within the time frame that we're talking about, Tuesday at 2 and Friday at noon. So they take a couple of different, they count all of the spaces within all of these zones. You can see just a few that are here, but it really spans the entire length of Lake Street plus a couple of blocks up the hill. And the idea being that, you know, we're able to sort of string together an idea of what at those specific times of day, what the capacity is. That count's usually taken in the summer when it's the busiest, and we try to take it a little later in the summer when it's also about as busy as we think it can be. We can't get it perfect every single time, but that's the nice thing about having a lot of years of parking studies at this point, is that we can be comparing them with each other and going, is there a big drop? Did something change? Is this just a quirk in the data? We can really see those sort of consistent trends over time.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's it.
Okay, if there are no other questions of staff, then I'll bring it back to council, and let me hear what your thoughts are. We'd like to start.
I'll get going if you don't mind, Mayor Pro Tem. I think I'm very relieved that you were able to get some data from us ahead of time for the 2024 parking study, and I'm relieved to hear that you haven't seen any significant deficits in parking spots. So I support this CUP amendment and excited to have another restaurant on that corner. I think it'll be great.
Yeah. Mayor Pro Tem, my thoughts are similar. You know, there's a lot of criteria and requirements that go along with fulfilling the fee and little parking policy. And it looks like, reading the information we have and discussions, that they've complied with all those requirements. I think the most interesting and important thing to believe to approve this is that there is available parking, and we have the parking study to help us with that. So, you know, this is a project that will enhance the vitality of our downtown area. I think our residents look forward to another really interesting place to go out in the evening enjoy their night. It's a highly valuable asset to our community. And the fact that the Planning Commission unanimously approved this, I would support this amendment also.
I support it. I have nothing further to add. I'll ditto.
Okay. Well, I'll just add a couple of comments. Wayzata is certainly not unique in having something like a file-out program, but it's certainly not universal either. And I think it was a very creative way of solving a parking issue that could be there. We're obviously not close to saturating our parking need, but it's nice that we have this option instead of developers having to do backflips to figure out how they're going to provide their own parking. So I'm also in favor of this. So I ask for a motion to adopt Resolution 37-2024 for amendments to conditional use permits for Eloise Restaurant parking at 332 Broadway Avenue South.
So moved, Mayor Pro Tem.
In a second,
Second, Mayor Pro Tem.
all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, where are we here? The next item is 8B, to consider adoption of Resolution 36-2024 for approval of a comprehensive plan amendment, rezoning, conditional use permit, setback variance, and design deviations, and approve the first reading of Ordinance 840, rezoning the property to the institutional for Moments of Wayzata at 163 Wayzata Boulevard West. Deputy City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council. I'll let Planners Weber get settled in. There's obviously a lot within that motion, so Planners Weber will do a great job breaking down each of the items being requested and give you an overview of the project.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council, and Deputy City Manager. Mayor Pro Tem introduced the item, so I won't reread the title of the request, but the owners, TMSC of Wayzata LLC, is the owner. We have Representative Jeff Schuler and owner Elizabeth Wright here in the audience, and they would like to give an update following my presentation and your questions. So moving. Okay. Looks like it's taken a second.
While they're figuring out the technology, I might remind the public, if you want to make a comment, please, if you're here in the audience, please fill out one of the slips and present it to city staff. And if you're online, go ahead and do a chat. So I did expect one. Here it is. All right. Thank you.
So the project location, we're on the north side of Wayzata Boulevard West. So this is west of Ferndale Road. Its west and northwest boundaries are Highway 12. You do see that there is a residential neighborhood to the south. There is Wayzata Boulevard West and then Babcock Lane, all within the same right-of-way. I bring that up because when we get to the landscape plan, they are proposing to add some additional landscaping in that boulevard between Wayzata Boulevard and Babcock Lane. Here is essentially the same project location, but with more descriptions. We have Redeemer Lutheran Church directly to the east. Beyond that, to the east is both Wayzata Community Church School and the middle school. To the south are the single-family residences. We highlighted Babcock Lane there again. And then to the northwest is the city of Orono and the country club. So the surrounding neighborhood, what is the zoning and the land use? So the zoning and land use of this particular property as it stands today, the zoning is PUD, planned unit development. That was specific for the Meridian Manor use. And then high-density residential is the proposed use to the, or in the comp plan You could see that institutional is the properties to the east, and institutional public is the properties to the east as well. So here's a street view looking at the former Meridian Manor. And I'm going to go through this in detail here because it's a lot of requests, but also there are different standards in reviewing these different requests. So the first two, the comprehensive plan amendment from high-density residential to institutional public, and the zoning map amendment, which we refer to as a rezoning from PUD to institutional, those are what we refer to as legislative decisions, meaning the city council has a lot of discretion to their decision on if they think these are the appropriate uses. We highlighted in our staff report and kind of the bookend at the end of the staff report, relevant comprehensive plan sections that have to deal with housing for the elderly. And then, the institutional zoning district are what the city council should look at to consider if those are appropriate, particularly appropriate to the adjacent existing uses. The next two are no longer legislative decisions. These are quasi-judicial, meaning there are standards within our code about a conditional use permit for elderly care facility needs to have a number of requirements. Variances, we have standards within our zoning code about what you need to evaluate when you grant those variances. When you look at those, it's looking at them and going, are these standards met or not? But it's not looking outside those specific standards. So we call it quasi-judicial in that you're acting almost as if a judge. Have they met what the code says? The last one, the design standards deviations, this is more unique in that the design standards aren't subject to variances. They're deviations. They're the city council looking at the competing design standards and having the applicant not meet that design standard, do you end up with a better project than if you would have required them to meet them? So as we move through these, you have the most latitude for the first two of this doesn't feel right to you. But once we start moving down the list, it's does the code say does it meet those standards or not? So less discretion. So the previous approval, the Meridian Manor, this is what the PUD zoning allows. It was approved back in 1993. It allowed senior care alternative facility. It had 75 units, but could serve up to 90 residences. Had a building height of 35 feet and 3 stories. But when you measured from the sidewalk in front of Meridian Manor to the peak of the roof, it was 45 feet in height. It had 52 off-street parking stalls, and the unit sizes were allowed to be less than what the code requirement for unit sizes were. This is a map of the existing conditions. It's currently 25,068 square feet with a 3-story building with a courtyard. Surface parking in front to the south of the building. Garages on the west side of the building, which I would actually also point out do not meet the setback requirements of an institutional zoning. Existing stormwater pond to the north site, and then existing natural areas to the southeast corner and northern area of the site. Total site area, it's a little over 4 acres in size. So, Moments of Wayzata had come through back in 2021, and the city council did approve what was essentially a conversion of the existing Meridian Manor building into their memory care facility. So in 2021, the city council approved a PUD amendment and design standard deviations to allow that parking in front of the building. But when the applicant went to the Minnesota Department of Health, they did not approve the building for the use of a memory care facility. So they are not able to use the existing building for memory care. which is why they've come back to the city. Now, the city council did not see the previous submittal in February of 2024. The planning commission did. The planning commission conducted a public hearing, and residents came in and spoke. There were comments given about that design, that some changes need to be done, and this is what the applicant has done for its current proposal. So changes that they made, listening to both the planning commission and residents. From the public hearing was actually in August. I will point out, though, the images on the bottom, they're the current proposal. So the image on the bottom is the current proposal, just to illustrate the changes that they made. So they changed the colors of the exterior materials to a color pattern similar to the Folkestone development. That's that kind of earth, sand coloring. Included more hip and gable roofs to make more articulation to the facade. They also added they created 7 building recesses to the front facade, because back in the February request, they only had 4 building recesses that needed a design deviation. So they made the change to remove one of the design deviations. They added an additional doorway in the front facade to provide egress from an internal stairway. They reduced the depth of the second floor sunroom. Previously, that sunroom came all the way out over the porte-cochere, so it kind of stuck out from the building itself. And so they've reduced that depth by 17 feet to make it more in line with the other facade elements of the front of the building. And then they installed a 2-foot-high vegetated berm with arborvitae along Wayzata Boulevard to provide additional shading or shielding of headlights from the parking lot. That was a lot of the concern and discussion at that planning commission meeting in April about how that parking lot in the front could have an effect, particularly to the residents to the south. So this is the proposed site plan. You can see that the building is one linear building running east to west, essentially parallel to Wayzata Boulevard. Both in the staff report, I included, there was the narrative that was included from the applicant explaining why they prefer this design for memory care. I know the applicant would like to present that information themselves when they have an opportunity to speak. But you'll see there are 2 parking areas in this design. There is a parking area to the south of the building, basically along Wayzata Boulevard. And then there is a parking area to the northwest, and that is designed for the employees. So basically visitors or vendors, service providers that come in would use the front, and then the employees would be in the back. You do see to the northeast a large area that is a recreation area for the residents, enclosed, fence, secure. So this is kind of our color rendering to show those differences. We have the new 2-story walkout building, 80 elderly care facility dwelling units, 62 parking stalls in front and in rear, the recreational patio and garden area in the rear yard, and they have an accessory building, which is shown there in purple, that will include an outdoor kitchen, cabana, and storage. So regarding setbacks, in the institutional zoning district, a 50-foot setback is required on all sides. They are meeting those to the north, south, and east. They are requesting a variance from that west side of 30 feet that they need to make that road to connect to that staff parking in the back. But they're requesting that essentially 20-foot variance to allow that long linear building shape, which again, they'll discuss why that's important to their residents. Building height, the maximum building height allowed in the institutional zoning district is 3 stories or 40 feet. They're proposing a height of 2 stories and 39 feet, 11 inches. Again, to discuss how we calculate height in the Wayzata zoning code, the top is measured from the midpoint of the highest gable, which happens to be that sunroom. The low point is actually the average grade around the entire building. Since this lot slopes down to the north, and it essentially is a walkout to the north, the average grade is below the front facade. So that's why it's measured 39 feet 11 inches, even though if you were looking basically from the front parking lot, it would look like a 32-foot building. But being consistent, we use the average grade to measure the height. So residential units and unit sizes, again, Meridian Manor had 75 units. Moments of Wayzata is proposing 80. The minimum area for an assisted living or memory care dwelling unit is 330 square feet. They are proposing a minimum of 402 feet. Their unit sizes actually vary between 402 and 580 square feet inside. The outdoor recreation area, this is a requirement per the CUP requirements that outdoor recreation needs to be provided to the rear yard of an institutional use. So that's why the outdoor recreation is where it's located to comply with the conditional use permit requirements. 10,735 square feet of garden, patio, and pathways are secured for the use by the residents. Site lighting, this map here shows each dot has a number next to it. There's obviously a lot of dots. They vary from 0 to 10 feet underneath some of the lights. Red dots are less than 0.5 foot candles. The current city code allows no more than 4 foot candles at the residential property line. The maximum light proposed at the property line is 0.5 foot candles, so underneath the code requirement. The lot coverage and floor area ratio for the institutional zone, the maximum lot coverage is 40%, and they're proposing 19.8. The maximum floor area ratio is 1, and they're proposing 0.5. So they meet the standards of lot coverage and floor area ratio. Now, there's a bit of grading here, and one of the resolution activities that would happen is they are proposing more than 2 feet of change in grade. As we stated, there's a lot of grade change as you go to the north to create that parking lot in the back for the employees and to create that landscaped area. They're actually proposing to change 3.55 feet in average over the site. They're doing that through a number of retaining walls, which vary from in one place up to 20 feet, most places in that 8 to 10 foot range. And then you'll see they are proposing a retaining wall now in front of the parking area on the south side that will be in places up to about 3 feet, maybe a little more. That is to create that berm that they're going to landscape. So currently the site kind of slopes off down toward from Wayzata Boulevard. Now it will go up to that retaining wall, and that helps to shield any headlights within the parking lot itself. So regarding parking, they are proposing 62 parking stalls that actually exceeds the requirements. It's 54 is required. I apologize, ignore the third bullet. That actually came from a different project and was not removed. But they are proposing 62 when 54 are required, so they meet the parking requirement. Regarding the tree preservation plan, it meets and exceeds minimum requirements. There are 775 inches on the site today. They are proposing to remove 360 356 inches, proposing a removal of 58% of the significant tree diameters. And they are proposing, what it comes out to be is that 282.2 inches must be replaced, and they're proposing to add 522 inches. Some of the replacement trees, as I mentioned early, was going to be installed in gaps in the current landscaping between Wayzata Boulevard and Babcock Lane West to help shield that neighborhood to the south. Landscaping plan, so in addition to the replacement trees, they are going to have a number of other elements of landscaping, including 612 shrubs, which are highlighted in the areas in green, and 150 grasses, which are highlighted in orange. So getting back to the requests, again, as I introduced, the first two, you have the most discretion, and they are ordered essentially in the order that if the city council chose to deny the first request, essentially all the other requests under it are moot. So if you deny the comprehensive plan amendment, the rest of those fail because the comp plan amendment doesn't happen. But we're going to go through each one of these in a little bit of detail. Now the comprehensive plan is, when you're looking at it on your left, the zoning's on the right. It is currently high-density residential. Their request is to change it to institutional public. You see that the property to the east and then the church and the middle school even further to the east, that's also institutional public. To the south is the low-density residential. So they're requesting the institutional and public, which is where we have senior housing uses like elderly care. The zoning is currently planned unit development, and again, that zoning is specific to Meridian Manor. And so they are requesting to rezone it to institutional to use the uses allowed in the zoning ordinance, including a CUP for elderly care facilities. So you see here, this is a list of all the residential different districts in the city and then the institutional district. Elderly care facilities are a conditional use in the institutional district. It's not allowed in any of the residential districts. So that's why they are requesting the conditional use permit because that is what our zoning code says is the appropriate zone for memory care use. Finally, moving on to the variance to the side yard setback. This is the west side yard setback, which is adjacent to Highway 12. They are requesting to reduce that from 50 feet down to 30. 30 feet would allow for that access road to the parking to the north. Regarding a number of design deviations. Again, these are not variances, they're deviations. The whole point of evaluating design standards is to evaluate if granting this deviation would create a better project. And so parking location is one of the requests. Design standards prohibit parking in the front yard. But we have a balance here of the CUP standards for elderly care facility require any recreational areas to be located in the rear yard. So if we were providing all the parking in the rear yard, we're sacrificing the recreation area for the residents. So the deviation request is to allow the parking in the front yard. Second one is massing breaks. So our design standard says above the ground floor, there needs to be a 25-foot break. If they were to propose that standard, they would essentially make the second floor into 3 separate distinct units. And, residents getting from one area of the second floor to another would essentially have to go down to the first floor, walk over, come back up to the second floor. So what they're proposing is the areas in green would be glazed breezeways that would allow people to move from one unit to another. But those areas in green are not occupiable space. It's not units, it's not, recreational facilities, it's not offices. It's just simply to be allowing the movement of the residents and staff across the second floor. The areas in orange, we just highlight in that there is no building there. So the roof is essentially on the first floor or over the first floor for the areas in orange. So the only thing that's in that massing break is that glazed breezeway to allow that travel. The next design standard deviation is that units that have an exterior wall at the ground level are required to have a door. You know, in a typical residential building, that makes a lot of sense, that if you're on the parking lot or the sidewalk, you could walk directly in and out. But being memory care, both, that's a safety issue, but also if it appeared like there was a door, even if it didn't function, just adds confusion to the residents. So they're requesting that for this type of use, adding doors, even if they weren't functional, would be a detriment to the residents. And then there is a requirement for a 36-inch parapet on top of a roof. They are proposing only in the areas of those massing breaks. And I wish that green line, I guess, would stand out more. But basically, between the numbers 3 and 4, and between the numbers 8 and 9, they're only proposing a 12-inch parapet to provide the minimum need. But that area is the massing break where we're trying not to put things with a visual impact. And they're requesting a shorter parapet to result in less of a visual impact in those areas of the massing break. So the Plan Commission reviewed this application back in August, and the Planning Commission said that the applicant addressed the issues raised by the neighbors in the Planning Commission during their review of the February 2024 application. But just as a reminder, they applied in February. We conducted the public hearing in April. They said that the properties north of Wayzata Boulevard West are guided institutional public and zoned institutional, so they felt that was compatible with the surrounding neighbors. And they voted 5-0 to recommend approval of all the development requests. Okay, so the proposed motions, we have 2 motions, but they actually have different voting requirements. So the first motion would be the resolution for the comprehensive plan amendment, rezoning, conditional use permit, setback variance, and design deviations. Because it includes the comprehensive plan amendment, the state statute requires that a supermajority of the entire city council, not simply the city council that's present, your 5-member city council, you have to have a supermajority of that, which happens to be 4 affirmative votes. So with only 4 members here tonight to approve the resolution, we need all 4 to vote affirmatively. Should you vote affirmatively for that, when you get to the ordinance, that only requires a majority of votes. So for who's here tonight, we would only need 3 of the 4. But without having the 4 votes for the resolution, it would not pass. With that, I would stand for any questions you may have.
All right, council, any questions of staff?
I do. Were there discussion and/or designs looked at with putting the parking in the rear and trying to work that with the outdoor space,
Right.
moving the building forward?
No, because one of the reasons why was the 2021 approval included that parking in the front. So they wanted to continue the request of the parking in the front, which was approved by the city council, but denied by the Minnesota Department of Health.
Okay, maybe I missed that in your summary. Can you just go through that again?
Certainly. Yeah. if you could. Should be next one. No.
What?
Yep, right there.
This feels like it was the old.
No, no, no.
Sorry, bear with us as we.
That's back when they were going to modify the existing facility.
Yeah, but now they're tearing it down, so.
Okay. So this was the approval back in 2021. Number two there was, at that time, the city council approved the design standard deviation to allow parking in front of the building.
And even though they're tearing the building down, that design standard modification still stands?
No, this is a new request, but I was trying to address your question about was it evaluated or not?
Okay.
Yeah, because Councilmember Parkle, just to be clear, in 2021, when that approval came through, it was based on renovation of the existing building.
It just seems like that's the biggest issue with the neighbors is the parking in the front. There's still, and I know that there's attempts made to modify that, and, but anyway, I just wanted to see what they were thinking at the time, and I might ask them the same question.
Well, they'll certainly get an opportunity here in just a minute. Are there any other questions of staff before we bring up the developer?
Thank you. Planners Weber, you noted that the property is guided high-density residential in the comp plan. And maybe you could elaborate on how or why those bodies chose that designation when there was already an elder care facility there. Like, what was the theory behind not making it institutional at that time?
Unfortunately, I cannot address that question just because it was a different community development director even than Emily, and a different consultant that prepared that comprehensive plan. So I was not involved in the preparation of the comprehensive plan. And at that time, Jeff Thompson was the community development director, so.
In your experience, do you find that that designations on properties change in these comp plan reevaluations with existing uses on the P? Could you just give us a little bit of context?
From knowing the comprehensive plan, a guess would be there's discussion within the comprehensive plan in a number of areas to provide more variety of housing and more housing, for people to age in place. Maybe not in their house, but within the community. On one hand, institutional would make a lot of sense because that's where, senior housing would go. But there isn't a lot of locations in the city where new apartment buildings or condos would be appropriate either. So my guess is that it was a fairly large site with an aging building that probably could meet the standards of our zoning district for a new apartment or condominium. But that's a guess that comp plan designation would meet that. We did discuss that quite a bit at the April public hearing, including a few residents who stated they would prefer it to be institutional over high-density residential. The thought of having, it could be up to 160 apartments on that property didn't seem like an appropriate use in that neighborhood.
So at the April public hearing, or what meeting was that in April?
So that was the first request. They submitted a request in February of this year. We held the public hearing in April. You know, we were having discussions like this, and there were a number of people who commented that the alternative of not having senior housing here and the comp plan density allowing up to 160 units on that property doesn't seem to be a better alternative than what was being proposed.
Okay. And when is the comp plan being studied and finalized?
That would have been 2018. It needs to be updated every 10 years. I think it was adopted in early 19, but the public draft and the discussions we were having were in late 2018.
Okay.
Any other questions of staff? Then I would invite the owner and developer to come up. Please remember to state your name and address for the record.
Ladies first. My name is Elizabeth Wright, 13564 Western S Road, Minnetonka.
And I'm Jeff Schuler, 3953 Regent Avenue North in Robbinsdale.
First, I want to thank the City Council for taking this up today. We have obviously been through quite a bit trying to get this Moments of Wayzata off the ground and really starting to be able to care for our seniors and our residents and most importantly, people with dementia. I'm going to give that to you because I'm no good with those. It's where my technology ends. I don't know how to play with. Does it work? So one of the things that I wanted to discuss, because I hear it a lot and people don't necessarily understand really what the Moments is and what we do. The Moments is purpose-driven and purpose-built memory care community. What was supposed to be up there is a video. It's not going to work, but I think I said this at the Planning Commission. If you can imagine down in Lakeville, just south of Buck Hill, we built what amounts to 92 units of memory care. The most important thing and one of the most important design things regarding that is actually how we have a linear building. It allows for our residents to move around and wander. People with dementia have this need where their anxiety gets going so much that they walk and walk and walk, and running into dead ends is not helpful. It causes what we hate to term as behaviors, but it causes behaviors and it causes exit seeking. So really the question has come about why are we doing a linear building, and I think I heard the Mayor Pro Tem ask why, or maybe it was Councilmember Parkhill ask, why didn't we move the building forward? And why have we continued with that linear building? It's about the residents. It really is. It's about the best use, best ability to care for our residents, having open hallways, being able to see from one end of the building to the other end of the building, being able to watch have our staff make sure that they're paying attention to the residents, and having no dead ends, no walls, nothing like that, where the general response for most memory care is it's the other side of a door within an assisted living. It's that locked door, it's that depressing feel, and that is the last thing we want. That's why we've asked for the massing breaks as well. The Moments has become something that I'm very proud of. We were recently named one of the top 4 operators in the nation to watch for 2024. I think that when we talk about dementia and memory care, I think we can change how people look at it. One of the other parts of that video would have been the extensive outdoor space. Our residents, I just had someone move in today whose family couldn't believe, and the resident, quite frankly, couldn't believe how much outdoor space and how beautiful it was down in Lakeville, and what kind of peace that brings to them. It includes, down in Lakeville, for us, it includes a koi pond, which we're planning on having here as well, among other things. But it's really important to have more than a postage stamp size outdoor space. And that being said, that's why we want to have that extensive exterior. And with that, I'm going to let Jeff finish up explaining the rest of it.
Thank you. We're having a little bit of trouble with the display, but yeah, we've been through many iterations with this project, and I think we've finally found something that generally everybody is happy with. This is the latest rendition of the exterior of the building, including lots of different materials, different color palettes, moving from light to dark, and incorporating as much as we can visual breaks in the building. This is from the west side of the property. So the new site design, our biggest challenge was, we've been through this process 3 times, was working with the neighbors who have grown accustomed to the Meridian Manor as it is. We heard lots of feedback on wanting something that felt residential, wanting to preserve as many existing trees as possible, and preserve what is a fairly natural feeling site. And so at the biggest effort to that, shielding the neighbors and preserving the site as it is, was keeping the building. Our current building is located very close to where the existing building is. And the biggest factor to that is to protect all the mature trees along Wayzata Boulevard. We heard multiple times how important those trees are. And that's where leaving the building in the existing site of the existing building and keeping the parking lot in the front came into play. There's also moving that building any far forward. If you impact 30 or more % of a tree's root systems, you have a very strong likelihood of killing that tree. And if you move it even farther in 50%, it's almost guaranteed to die. With this building, we have a full basement. It's a walkout on the back, but it's a basement on the front. We'll be excavating about 20 feet. And in order to do that excavation, you need to go out at least as far as you go deep. And so moving the building back, or keeping it where the existing building is the best way to preserve those trees. We also had the struggle of balancing the residents of this site, the CUP requirements, and the design standards of parking. And we think it's best for everybody, the residents, the neighbors, and following the city design guidelines to keep the recreation area, the gardens in the back, away from the loud traffic of Wayzata and more secluded. And so by doing that, we've used half of the rear yard. And so with the rest of that rear yard, we've put as much parking as possible on that site, and we've been somewhat forced to do the rest of the parking at the front of the building. The other thing I'll point out about this site is from Wayzata Boulevard to the edge of that pond, this site drops 35 feet. And so it is a somewhat challenging site to get surfaces that, especially for seniors, flat, level walking areas. There's a bit of a challenge to make sure we accommodate that. So our new plan preserves as many trees, especially in the front, as possible. The big thing we're adding is along that Wayzata Boulevard, arborvitae. A row of arborvitae will be planted just south of that parking lot. Those arborvitae, when installed, will be 10 feet tall and will continue to grow throughout the years, creating a fairly dense screening. And then as far as lighting, that was another concern that we heard loud and clear from the neighbors. All our lighting will meet the dark sky criteria, and as Eric illustrated, we have essentially zero light from our parking lights that infiltrate out to the surrounding neighbors. We also, through the few iterations, we have lowered the amount of parking stalls in the front. We're now, and the parking stalls that we've removed were the ones facing Wayzata Boulevard, so the ones that had the potential to impact the neighbors more than the others. This is a quick section through the site showing the retaining wall along Wayzata Boulevard that we're proposing. That retaining wall was once again to address the concerns of the neighbors along Babcock, that one of their biggest concerns is headlights in their spilling over Wayzata Boulevard. So we have the parking lot will be at the same grade as it is now. There's a natural slope there of about 3 feet, and then we are adding a 3-foot retaining wall that will only be visible from the interior of our site. From Wayzata Boulevard, it will just look like a hill with the 10-foot arborvitae at the top of that wall. So as you can see in this diagram, a typical SUV has a hood height of about 3 feet. And from the parking lot to the top of that wall, we're at about 6 feet off of that parking lot. This is a perspective. As Eric pointed out, we are vastly surpassing the amount of trees we need to plant to both replace and meet design guidelines. And this is just an illustration of what those trees look like between the arborvitae, the existing trees, and other deciduous trees being planted at the front of that property. It will be very difficult within a year or two for any of the neighbors to see much of the building, and that extends into the winter. The reason for the arborvitae is they're evergreen trees. They'll be green and full throughout the year. As you can see in this perspective, essentially the first 18 to 20 feet of the lower part of the building is blocked, but especially the parking. The other thing I want to address is the side yard variance. Right now, there's an existing garage that's 5 feet off of the property line, and we are requesting that we have a 30-foot setback, which is 20 feet less than required, but it's a big improvement on what it already exists. The other thing I wanted to illustrate in this drawing is that the existing building comes out to right about here, and then there is a equipment screen with chiller, generator, and other things, and then we've got the garage. So essentially from Wayzata, we have what looks to be a near solid building all the way up to the 5 feet off that property line. And then the biggest reason for the linear building is the need to create an easily navigable building for the residents. Right now, what essentially happens with that linear building is there's large common areas, but at the ends of the hallways, we've got center rooms that make a loop at the end. So it's nearly impossible for people to get stuck in a dead end, and that it tends to be a very big problem with especially dementia care. So with this linear building, the other piece that really works well with the linear building oriented how it is with the 35-foot drop in the site. If we were to orient it north-south or do more of a U-shape, we end up with the building sticking out higher out of the site, which is something that makes the building look and feel larger and detracts from the neighbors. So this This slide was used mainly for the Planning Commission, some of the changes we made from the previous iteration. But I think they're still relevant because it shows in multiple iterations, we've listened to neighbors and tried to get this building closer to work for the residents and the community at large. So some of the changes we made were the darker, more natural colors. We got feedback. Our original plan had a mainly white building, and they felt it stood out too much. So now we went with darker, more natural colors that help it blend into the area, blend in nature. We have all the building recesses required. We more or less have the building massing breaks. We modeled these massing breaks off of the ones that were allowed for the future apartment buildings at the Wells Fargo site, a transparent area that I think still meets the requirement, still meets the intent of that design variation to break the building up so it doesn't look so large. The other reason we really feel it's important to have the breezeways is if we were not allowed to have these breezeways and we needed true massing breaks, that would essentially mean that this building needs 3 elevators. And as of right now, in our other residencies, residents are not able to use an elevator on their own. Many of them get confused. And so here we can keep a central elevator, which staff can help everyone operate. We reduced the sunroom over the porte cochere to help bring that building farther back away from the road, which we've heard is important to the neighbors, kind of moving that building farther back if we can to try to not impose on Wayzata Boulevard and the neighbors. More sloped roofs. This originally had more flat roofs to try to keep the building as low as possible, but what we heard was the flat roofs feel more commercial, and they'd rather have a more residential feel, possibly even if that comes at the expense of taller roof peaks. But while doing that, we also did lower the bearing height of those roofs 2 feet on the south side, so it appears that it hasn't really grown any taller. It just now has sloped roofs. And then the biggest one, to try to address what we heard was the biggest concern, the parking at the front. We've added the berm and the row of arborvitae to make sure that that parking lot is very well screened. The way it's set up, the grading and berm will block all of the car's lights and most cars. And then we also have put the arborvitae on top to screen any other movement. And then the exit doors, I'll just touch on that briefly. There is the additional request for exit door for residence entry doors at any residential unit that's less than 4 feet off of grade, 3 or 4 feet off of grade. And that would just cause confusion with residents, and they would be doors that could not be used by anybody, whether they are coming from the outside or trying to leave out of the inside. So in closing, this is just the porte cochere that I think really helps show what we've done to bring this down to a more residential scale. And Elizabeth and I are here for questions. Elizabeth is better suited for all the operational questions, and I can answer any design questions.
All right, thank you. Questions of the developer by council? Go ahead.
In the staff's presentation, the massing breaks were, you showed sort of like a glass, Planners Weber put up a slide that said, you know, the orange area is essentially nothing. It's just to show that it's looking like a massing break. But when I look at your proposal here, does that theory not go down to the first story?
Correct. In the planning district that we are in, it's only required on the floors above first floor.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any questions? Other questions? I've got one here. During your presentation, you made mention of that there were some parking stalls that were added to the plan and then were taken away because they were ones that were facing Babcock Lane across the street. So what is the number of parking stalls we're talking about now?
So I believe Pat can probably give us a number of what the parking stalls facing Babcock are. I believe it's, it's 13 facing Babcock, and before, I think that took away 6 from facing Babcock, if I remember correctly. So what we were trying to do is actually move the employee parking, which is down along that driveway down to the back of the building, where we actually have the employee entrance, where they're going to punch in, where they're going to have their space down in the lower level before they then go up to the other floors. So we've only got 13 facing Babcock, which is really where the headlight would come in. The other ones are all facing the building itself. So anything in the front that you would see in the front would be facing the building itself, which means the headlights would be going towards the building. Either way, it would tell you that when people are leaving, there are going to be headlights as people are leaving any type of piece of property. It doesn't matter where it is. But for us, it was having, being able to have in the back of the building, have the deliveries, have the garbage pickup. So like U.S. Foods, Medline, all of those deliveries can be made in the back of the building now, alleviating a lot of that other, I think, headache that some of the residents across the street had. So that's really why we wanted to make sure we had as much of that in the back of the building and space for that as well.
And I'll just add one more thing. The 19 that were originally there are in the exact same location as the 19 that are there right now, but now we've reduced it to 13. So if you go out there today, there's 19 facing the road in the exact location, and we have reduced it down to 13.
So back when Meridian Manor was in operation, they had 19?
19 facing Wayzata.
Okay, very good.
Can I have a follow-up question to yours, Mayor Pro Tem? I noticed that there are only 13 spots in the back lot. As I counted along with you on so I think that's pretty accurate as I count those out. Do you have more than 13 staff members?
So in the rear, there's 20 stalls. I don't have it in mind.
I guess maybe they're just not drawn into this.
I think perhaps what you're missing might be the ones in the middle of the parking, like in the middle of what looks like a circle.
Those like half
in the back.
moons?
Yeah,
Yeah.
in between there, and then you've got along north facing and then west facing.
How many people on average do you think are there at your peak times, employee-wise?
We would have probably, the biggest one for us would be that evening into overnight shifts. The overnight is obviously a lot less, but considering that's when headlights actually are a problem, we would have, doing some quick math in my head, maybe 14, 15 on the PMs. And then obviously overnight it's less than that. So there should be enough for those overnight, PM to overnight to switch out along with day shift as well.
And all the people that are going to be working in this building, are they specifically employees to care for this building? Or is this, anything greater than that? Is this part of your plans to be a larger scale?
No, this is all specific to the Moments of Wayzata.
Okay, so no corporate offices?
No corporate offices.
Okay. Thank you.
I had one more question. You made reference to the dark skies part of your plan. In our packet, there was some mention by, I believe, as an outside party, but talked about a dark skies requirement, and I'm not aware that we actually have a dark sky requirement. So, developer or city staff, could you comment on that? Do we actually have a dark sky requirement technically?
Mayor Pro Tem, we currently do not, but the Energy and Environmental Committee is evaluating a potential text amendment that would add it to our ordinance, but currently it's not an ordinance.
Okay, so in our packet where it says requirement, there really is no requirement.
Well, there's no requirement for the dark sky. The slide I went through is our code requirement, of no more than 4-foot candles at a residential property line, and they're 0.5 at the most.
Okay.
And that's not even at a residential property line, that's either at the property line with Wayzata Boulevard, the institutional, Redeemer Church to the east, or Highway 12. So their application meets our code requirement currently for lighting. I think what the applicant brought up is they are picking light fixtures that do meet dark sky requirement, even though our city code does not require it.
Okay, just want to point that out. So there's no requirement, but they're meeting the requirement we might have had. Okay. Any other questions of the developer? Any parting comments before I get to public comments?
The other thing I just wanted to add in that plan is that we've also, to mitigate headlights, made sure that the front parking lot is only served by a one-way access. So they're the only time headlights will shine out towards Wayzata while maneuvering would be on that far west side to try to once again keep the headlight pollution to a minimum for the neighbors on the south side.
All right, thank you. Now, we do have one public comment here in the chambers. David Kirkland, if you'd come up and please state your name and your address.
David Kirkland, 176 Babcock Lane. Good evening, everybody. Over the 2.5 years of our Moments of Wayzata Odyssey, the neighbors have been consistent in their comments and concerns, and they are tree preservation, light pollution, and residential scale architecture. Our goal has always been to help influence the development of a beautiful and functional building on this site. We have always been in favor of senior care residential and hope that it comes to pass. First, tree preservation. With the zoning change to institutional from PUD, the applicant complies with the tree preservation ordinance while still removing almost 50% of the significant trees on the site and replacing them with hundreds of saplings. If we truly believed in climate change and the need for clean air, we would not let this happen. Maintaining the PUD zoning will allow for protection of the trees. We urge the City Council to consider retaining the PUD zoning and updating it for this development. Light pollution, primarily from the high-intensity LED headlights that are always on automatic, and the parking lot lighting are the most concerning to the residents. The residents have requested multiple times that the parking in the front of the building not face the neighbors. It should be relocated to the rear or the west side of the site as required by the design standards. If done, this, in addition to the use of only dark sky fixtures throughout the site, will satisfy the neighbors' concern for light pollution. By shortening the already long, and from looking at the renderings, it is very, very long, building by only 20 feet, bringing in compliance with the side yard setback, we create the room to relocate the parking to the west edge of the property. And the question comes up, what is the hardship? And hardship, as you know, cannot be caused by the applicant themselves. And in this case, it is their own site planning and building planning that creates the problem. So I think from that standpoint, the variance does not meet the standards. The residential scale architecture should be both residential in appearance and scale to fit in and complement the architectural designs seen throughout the Highlands. The linear two-story box with a large covered entry, which is the one element that I think really we need to rework, does not feel like a large residential home. It appears to be a long institutional building. There are many industry studies on recommended design elements for memory care. The exterior, and a few of them are, the exterior architecture and interior design should feel like a residential home. Rooms should be configured in pods of 4 to 6 units with short hallways connecting to familiar common spaces, especially the walking paths. That makes wayfinding much easier. Long, double-loaded corridors are to be avoided as they are the most confusing as to all the doors, because all the doors look the same. Walking on circular paths around healing gardens inside the building and out with abundant natural light are recommended in every study. Many of these recommended design elements are in direct conflict with what the applicant has been telling us. From doing research provided on the memory care industry, I've learned much regarding the nature and treatment of memory disorders, and I encourage you to do the same before making any final decisions on this submittal. We put our trust in the City Council to guide the creation of a beautiful building at the west entrance of the city that protects the residents' property values and reflects the character of Wayzata. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkland. So with that, are there any comments online?
Mayor Pro Tem, there are not.
All right, so with that, I'll bring it back to council and tell me what your thoughts are. And as a reminder, we have a supermajority requirement on the rezoning and of the full council, so that would require 4 positive affirmative votes tonight to move it forward. So I'd particularly like to get your sense of that in addition to anything else. City Attorney.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, just one quick clarification on that. So the supermajority requirement is for the comp plan amendment, which would then allow for the rezoning. So sort of a threshold question of should this be re-guided from multifamily residential to institutional in our comp plan?
Thank you, City Attorney. Okay, back to council.
Mayor Pro Tem, just a few comments. And the last one was one of my first questions. It is just the comp plan amendment that needs supermajority, right? Not the zoning map amendment and CUP.
Mayor Pro Tem and council members, so under our zoning code, no. But like I said, the comp plan amendment is kind of the but-for decision. None of the other decisions can really happen without that amendment. And arguably, we should probably have a supermajority on that rezoning too. I would feel more comfortable with that, but I think that's going to be the net result.
Okay.
Was that clear?
Yes. This has been around a while. 2021, I think back when it was more of a renovation or potential renovation, it was approved by the City Council. Earlier this year with a kind of new approach of building a new building. Back in February, it got denied by the Planning Commission, and there was considerable neighborhood opposition and commentary about this. And just more recently, a month or so ago, the Planning Commission approved this on a unanimous vote. So I guess this has been around a while, and there's a lot of issues. But I assume, Mayor Pro Tem, we should be commenting on just the comp plan amendment at this time. We're going to.
Well, I'll welcome comments about any of the 5 different things we're talking about, but that is the big one.
Yeah. So maybe just stick with, I'll keep my comments to that for now. I think if you look at the comp plan, the question is making a change like this consistent with the comprehensive plan. And a big part of that is providing a range of options for housing in our community. We certainly have a growing need of, we have an aging population and a great demand for elderly care facilities and more memory care facilities. This would serve a lot of residents. I think it would be very welcome by our community. I think a lot of people would call it a high priority. I think that combined with the fact that when you consider the use of this site the last, I'm not sure exactly how long, several decades, being an elderly care facility, that this is an appropriate use of this site, and in some respects, maybe even a better use than what the comp plan calls for now, which would be high-density residential.
Thank you. Councilmember Parkhill?
You know, as far as number A and B, I don't have any issues with either of those. I think there was some speculation that Councilmember McDonald brought up that.
Councilmember Parkhill, can you speak into the mic? Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll start over. I think Councilmember McDonald mentioned that there maybe should have been some consideration in making this institutional when we did our comprehensive plan to begin with, and I think that that is probably a decent reason, and the fact that it's remaining residential for all practical purposes and nothing against churches, but it's not going to be a church or some other institutional use that I don't have an issue with modifying the comprehensive plan or the zoning to institutional.
Councilmember McDonald?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I have given this a great deal of consideration, as I know all of you have as well. And I was really struggling, because I thought that guidance made a bit of sense, and as it's written today, and I felt that I could see and understand why they did that. However, knowing the community is really more behind this use, with it being institutional, I do feel comfortable amending the comp plan to be zoned institutional as opposed to being in favor of the high-density residential. So.
Very good, thank you. Since we're kind of focusing just on the big one, the comprehensive plan amendment, I'll comment on that as well. It seems to me that the neighborhood north of Wayzata Boulevard is not the same as the neighborhood south. It's dramatically different. You got a country club, you've got a church and another church, and it's not residential feeling to me. And having a memory care unit in Wayzata, I think, is something that we all want. I think even the people that have some criticism about some of the design standards, it's, I think, something that the city needs and can use. So in my view, I think changing the comprehensive plan with an amendment to change it institutional makes sense to me. So it seems like we have consensus on the big one. So with that, I'll open it up to other observations, comments, or questions about the other aspects of what's before us. We'll start at the other end again. Do you have any?
We'll start here again? So the other amendments, one was the conditional use permit, and from my understanding is that to allow use of elderly care facility, we need to, as a conditional use, we need this conditional use permit. So I think it's just kind of the next step in line to get us to the point of allowing an elderly care facility in this institutional zoning. So I'd be fine with that. As far as the setback issue, should we just chew on that one a bit, or you want me to keep going?
I would suggest you just get all the questions and comments out now rather than going back and forth.
Okay. As far as the setback variance, I think Planning Commission and City Council need to be very cautious about allowing any type of variance on a setback. In fact, you could argue some of our setbacks may not be or should be increased. In this case, though, given the fact that the functionality of this building, it requires this linear orientation, and that the setback would be violated on the site facing the highway. And we have this angular site coming into play. I don't see an adverse effect to the neighbors or anyone else in this neighborhood by approving this, and I think it's another situation of combining a unique site with the grade changes and the way the building needs to be oriented to make it work the best. So I'd be fine with the setback also. Keeping going on design standard deviations, the first two deal with the parking in front of the building. If you look at Wayzata Community Church, they have parking in front of that building. There was parking in front of Meridian Manor. And I think the fact that we're trying to use the site to its best advantage because it changes elevation about 30 or 40 feet. The way the building's oriented makes sense, and they've done a good job, the best job you probably can do of trying to mitigate the issues of parking in front of the building, so I didn't have a major issue with that. In terms of the massing breaks, I think they've done a good job trying to give the appearance of a massing break with creating the glass in those areas just on second floor and lowering the roofs in those areas. I think that's a positive thing. And for this building to function the way it needs to, it requires consistent hallways on second floor. So I think they've dealt with the intent and appearance of the massing breaks as best you can, yet allowing traffic to move back and forth on that floor. And the entry door issue and the screening of the roof sheeting issue, those variances, I think are both positive things. I think, again, given the use of this facility and the type of residents in this facility, and the fact that appearance-wise, it's a positive thing to lower the elevation of that roof above those glass areas is a positive thing. So in general, I'm on board, or I see the rationale and think the deviations are appropriate.
Councilmember Parkhill?
Yep, thank you. First of all, I want to thank the Planning Commission and for all their hard work. They spent a lot of time on this, and I do recognize that they voted 5-0 to approve this. I'm all for elderly care. I was for the daycare when you presented that a few years ago. I thought that was a much needed aspect for our community. So I think that's really good. I have no issues with the number of units, size of the building in general. I think all these things under item E, I get it. I don't love the parking in front. I wish it could be different, but I get it. My biggest issue, which gives me a little bit of pause, is the side yard setback. I feel it's a little bit developer created. So I'm kind of processing that right now. I do think it looks like a residential building, as much as a large building can. So I guess that's my only concern, which, I'm kind of processing right now, that side yard setback. It seems to be created by the landowner. And I get that we need a tubular building, but maybe it doesn't have to be as long. So other than that, all for everything else. So that's my thoughts.
Okay.
Okay.
Councilmember McDonald?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Starting from the top, when reading about the CUP and our request that the recreation be in the back, I feel like that should be something that the applicant should be questioning themselves. you mentioned you'd rather have your residents in the back of the building to be away from the traffic and noise of Wayzata on the other side. And as someone who lives in the adjacent neighborhood, there is nothing louder, traffic-wise, than Highway 12. I would call it mind-numbing loud. So that is something that I've really questioned a lot for and wondered if the property owner and the applicant has spent much time in those back areas next to the freeway, because it is very, very loud. So I'm stuck on the CUP for that reason. Moving down the line is the variance, I believe. Looking at staff, the variance would be next. The side yard setback, similarly to Councilmember Parkhill, I don't agree with that. I think if you have 4 acres and you're starting from scratch, that you should be able to abide by those setbacks. In terms of the design deviations, I have issues with the parking in the front. It being the first property when you drive into Wayzata, I think it would be a very regrettable decision by us if we allowed the parking to be in the front. It isn't what we envision this city to be, and I think it would, just to repeat myself, I think it would be regrettable. So I don't like the parking in the front either. Those have been very, very well studied and thoughtful design standards, and I just don't think this is a good reason to allow those parking spots to be in front. And furthermore, I would actually wonder if a 50-foot front yard setback would save as many of those trees that the applicant is saying that they're saving by keeping a parking lot in front. That doesn't square with me as I walk to the site. I feel that those 50 feet in the front, or was it 100? I forget, I'm sorry. Is it 50? 50, I apologize. 50 seems that those are the trees that are already being saved are in that 50-foot front yard setback. So I'm not in favor of that design deviation either. The ones I do think are quite reasonable are the hallways upstairs and the exterior doors. Seems very, very reasonable, and also safety is, of the utmost importance for the residents. I too did some of my own research in your planning commission presentation. Some awards were mentioned, or some notoriety, and I too did a lot of research using those publications and other award winners, and I just couldn't find a through line of long linear buildings being the success of these buildings. I just didn't find it. I looked at all of the award winners on both those awards, and I never found it. So I'm hesitant to, well, that's just what I want to say. That was what I had found. So those are the ones that I can work with, and the ones that I am unable to. So,
All right, thank
those are my
you.
comments.
It's going to be a complicated motion by the end of this, so I'm not sure where this goes. So we've already hit the big ones. I have no problem with the comprehensive plan amendment, the zoning amendment, or the conditional use permit. I mean, it's what we want as a community. So moving to setback variance, I've heard a couple of council members who have a problem with that. I didn't hear a hard no, but the concerns. So I'll comment about that. I don't have a problem with that. And the reason, at least in my mind, why there is such a thing as a setback variance on the sides is the effect on the neighbors. And in this case, the neighbor that would be affected by that is it's not consequential at all, We're looking at a highway and a country club golf course. I don't think that would affect that neighbor whatsoever. 20-foot setback, 50-foot setback, 5-foot setback. I don't think that's really a problem. That's why I look at it. If there was a residential property to the west, then then we'd have to consider it. But in this case, I just don't think it's a problem. In terms of design standard deviations, parking is the big one that we've talked about here, and again, a couple of council members have a problem with that. But I think, let me also shout out to the Planning Commission. The chair is sitting here with her daughter. That's great, see that. But I think the Planning Commission did a masterful job in taking a look at all the different parts of this equation. And they were 5-0 in favor of this, just the way it's been presented to us, and I have no problem with that. But with regard to parking, concern is having parking in front. And yes, generally speaking, our zoning is that any new building, commercial building or building like that would have parking in the back. And I think we understand why. We don't want to look at cars, we want to look at the building. But in this case, the parking, if we were to have them move the building forward in order to put the parking behind, then you got to consider what the consequence of that is. To me, having a few parking spots in front that apparently are very well shielded from any light pollution would be more than overcompensated by a big, massive building being brought closer to the street. I would much rather have a berm with cars that we can't even see and the building in the further back than a big building right up near the street. If there's either or, I would opt for the building further back. And again, I do think that the plan has called for enough shielding that lights won't be a problem. I don't see it. I know that it's a concern of the neighbors, but it feels to me like their concerns have been addressed. So, and then the other minor things here, screening of the sheet roofing. Again, there's nothing there to shield. 3-foot parapet is meant to shield from the views of rooftop accessories. That's not even a problem here, so I don't have a problem with that. The bottom line for me is I really don't have a problem with this as it is been presented to us. So since we have one motion and 2 votes in the middle, maybe the city attorney can help me with this.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem. This does get a little complicated because there's multiple requests. Some of them require a supermajority vote, as our consultant planner pointed out, which would require all 4 of you. Sounds like those votes, however, aren't really the issue. It's the things that follow. And whenever we have a council that might be heading in a different direction than the resolution that we've prepared based on the Planning Commission's report, our recommendation to you is to direct staff to come back with a new resolution that you could act upon. The additional benefit of doing it in this case, I think, is that we would hopefully have a full council at the next meeting. We might have a split 2-2 vote on some of these particular requests being made tonight. Then we also have the issue of the threshold questions of supermajority. So I'm going to look to our deputy city manager and our consultant planner, but what I'm thinking right now, Mayor Pro Tem, is that it would make sense to ask for a motion, direct staff to come back with a new resolution where we bifurcated the votes on, which is say we took 2 votes, one on the comp plan and rezoning, which would be our supermajority vote that I heard consensus on. And then we would also have a different vote, which would only require a simple majority on all the other requests. And I think at least one of them I think there were potentially 2 council members here this evening that wouldn't vote for the setback variance. So you'd be deadlocked tonight on that particular one. And so I think we would bring it back. Hopefully you'd have 5 council members considering and voting on that one in particular and all the others. So again, to recap, I think what makes sense to me is a motion to direct staff to come back with a new resolution at your next meeting where we take separate votes on those two items.
Can I make a comment, Alex?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Given the consideration for the variance for the side yard setback, I don't like it. I don't like it, but I think 3.5 years and hundreds of considerations that these folks have considered and worked with the neighbors, I don't like, the reason I don't like it is not because it's close to a highway, because that's really inconsequential, but it just makes the building slightly bigger. But I do believe that the building is very residential looking. It's two-story on this side, and I would be willing to vote in favor for the side yard setback, which might change the outcome of where you were headed.
Right. So Mayor Pro
can still
Tem.
do it your way.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, I think, it's your call procedurally. I think you could call for 2 votes on the resolution that's on the table. I would ask for a vote on the comp plan amendment and rezoning first, and then ask for a vote on the other items being requested. So the setback variance, help me here, design deviations, and facilities CUP.
So in that suggestion, is that first motion to also include the zoning map amendment?
I think those two follow logically.
Okay.
So yes, I think, and I would prefer that too, because there is some question whether we should have a supermajority vote on the rezoning as well. So as your city attorney, I would prefer to have supermajority for both those.
And it feels to me like this evening, we do have consensus supermajority on those 2 issues.
That's what I heard as well, Mayor Pro Tem.
So if we could separate that vote out and vote on it tonight, and then vote on the rest yet tonight, there might be a split vote, but it wouldn't be as consequential as the first.
Correct. I think if we have a split vote, no action is taken. And if, at that point, I would want you to direct staff to come back, or to table it, rather, to your next meeting, where you would have 5 members voting on this. We wouldn't have a 2-to-2 situation.
The only things that I could see as being 2-to-2 tonight from comments is the parking and the setback.
Right. So if your second motion fails, I'd recommend you ask for a motion to direct staff to come back with an alternative motion that would incorporate a denial on whatever you were split on. It sounds like it would be the parking.
Okay. Well,
And in that, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mayor Pro Tem. In that respect, I almost wonder if we need votes on each one of those other requests if, your motion to just adopt all the others fails. You following me?
I am.
Yeah.
That's why we call you counselor, because you give us wise counsel.
Oh, well, thank you.
Okay, so where are we here? I think I will entertain a motion then to, let me just read it here.
Mayor Pro Tem, I could give you that based on this, because I think there's some things we want to say. I think the motion would be to adopt Resolution 36, 2024, with respect to the comprehensive plan amendment and rezoning only.
Very well said. So will somebody offer that motion?
I would offer that motion, Mayor Pro Tem.
And is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So now we're on to the remainder of what we've got before us here. Again, I'll defer to city attorney on how should we best put that together for a vote.
And Mayor Pro Tem, I think you can ask for a motion to adopt Resolution 36, 2024 for a conditional use permit, setback variance, and design deviations for Moments of Wayzata at 163 Wayzata Boulevard East.
All right, that sounds reasonable. So again, I will entertain a motion as just stated by the city attorney.
Mayor Pro Tem, I have a question.
Shoot. I may or may not be able to answer this.
So if this is a 2-2 vote, then it doesn't pass, right?
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember, yes, it does not, should say, correct, it does not pass.
And then what?
Mayor Pro Tem can ask for a motion on some, but not all. I think if we have a 2-2 vote on any one of these, we don't have findings of fact to support anything. So I'm going to want you to direct staff to come back with alternative findings. Right now, what's in the record is the Planning Commission's report and recommendation that includes findings for approval of the balance of the applications. So, if this next motion that isn't made yet but is proposed doesn't pass, we need to probe a little further and figure out what the issue is. Yeah.
Okay.
So I will remind the council that what's before us passed the Planning Commission, who did some pretty in-depth work on this. It passed unanimously. And so I trust their judgment for the most part all the time, not entirely, but all the time. So I'm going to take the risk and say I'd like to entertain a motion to adopt the rest of these as indicated by the city attorney with an up or down vote. And if it does split 2-2, then I will redirect for staff to come back with findings of fact to support that. So still waiting for a motion.
I would make that motion.
And is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on this item?
So Mayor Pro Tem, just because we've had a few motions flying back and forth, I just want to remind council and those watching that what's on the floor is a resolution for the conditional use permit, the setback variance, and design deviations for moments, all of them. This requires a simple majority.
Any discussion? Then I will take a vote. All in favor of the said motion indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Motion carries. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, just one follow-up to that is the bottom motion that we need for the first reading of Ordinance 840, approving the rezoning to institutional for Moments of Wayzata. Now, this might seem a little redundant, but whenever we make a zoning change, we're amending the zoning ordinance, and that it's effectuated by this ordinance. So this just flows from what we just read, simple majority needed for adoption of first reading of Ordinance 840.
So is that now a new motion?
Yes, I would just ask for a motion to adopt the first reading of Ordinance 840 as presented.
Okay, then I'll ask for a motion to adopt the first reading of Ordinance 840, approving the rezoning to institutional for Moments of Wayzata at 163 Wayzata Boulevard East.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Motion carries. All right, thank you all.
That's that. Thank you.
So, where are we here in this? Okay, the next item is 8C, to consider adoption of Resolution 34-2024, certifying to the county auditor the preliminary property tax levy for taxes payable in 2025, and Resolution 35-2024, approving the 2025 preliminary budgets. So, over to Deputy City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. We've been talking about this for several months, but maybe in the public's eye, the discussion of the budget and preliminary property tax levy, this might be the first time they hear about it. Up to this point, we've talked about our capital needs, long-term staffing plans, long-term financial plans, as well as then reviewing some earlier drafts of this preliminary budget. But the action tonight would be to adopt, to certify to the county auditor our preliminary property tax levy, which, as a reminder, that sets the ceiling. That's as high as our property tax levy could be. We can lower it from now until the final levy that's set in December, but the prelim is what will get mailed to all residents on their preliminary tax statement. And then approval of the preliminary budgets. That's what's on deck for tonight. Just as a reminder, because I think it's always important to tie some of our significant work, the budget being one of them, back to our strategic priorities, which are to diversify revenue, achieve and sustain operational excellence, and sustain community character and safety. And I think in a number of ways, this budget and some of the additional requests this year align with those strategic priorities. All in, the budget itself is comprised of many different government functions. A lot of times people think just of the general fund. That's what provides a lot of quintessential government services, police, fire, park maintenance, things like that. But our total budget is proposed to be at about $23.2 million. The biggest portion of that, almost 40% of that, is that general fund. But the other significant player in there is our liquor fund. So that's our bar and grill operation, our wine and spirits operation. About 20% of that budget is our utility funds, water, sewer, and the like, and smaller budgets from there. So when you refer to our all-in budget, 23.2, just the general fund itself, about $9.2 million. Diving in a little deeper to, okay, where do all these, this is our budget, where does the money really come from? And we're proposing about $22.6 million in revenues. A significant portion of that, over $9 million or 43% of that total budget, comes from charges for services. So in the city offices, you think of some of our planning related charges, but this encompasses much more, like anytime you dine at Wayzata Bar and Grill, make a purchase at Wine and Spirits, that's all encompassed in things that we consider charges for services. The next significant portion of that total revenue budget, about 30%, is property taxes with utility charges after that. So again, a big variation across all our budgets on where those revenues come from. But again, since taxes is such an important impact to our residents, that's why we spend more time diving in on the general fund itself. On the revenue side, like I mentioned before, it's about a $9.2 million revenue budget, with the majority of that, about 70% of that, coming from property taxes. On the expenditure side of things, we are proposing a balanced budget, so it's again about $9.2 million. The biggest portion of that, 39%, is for our police department, 23% for admin and general government services, followed equally 12% for public works, parks and recreation, 8% for our community development services, 5% for fire, and 2% for capital outlay. Some of the budget goals that emerged in our discussions throughout the budget process were, first, that we should be investing in public safety personnel, both existing and future, that we need to follow through on implementing our strategic plan initiatives, and then what can be sometimes a competing value is minimizing the impact on our residents. So that came through in our strategic planning and was part of the impetus behind diversifying our revenues. But I think it's important that this remains a goal of the city council as you're really trying to balance how do we get services and make sure we're doing the best that we can while also not overstretching and burdening our residents. So all of those budget items culminate into what will be certified to the county as our preliminary levy. You can see there that there's about $6.4 million proposed for the general fund budget, about $500,000 proposed for city infrastructure, so that goes directly to pay for streets, equipment, things like that, for a total property tax levy of $6.964 million, and that's about an 8.71% increase from the property tax levy last year. So here's kind of a trajectory of our levy percentage increases over the last several years. We're often asked kind of what is driving that increase? What do you need more this year than you needed last year? And I think those are great questions. Some of those reasons include we're making more investments in IT and technology, including the scope of our services with our IT provider, wanting to set more resources aside for cybersecurity improvements, implementing our new phone system. Another big driver was investments in employee compensation. That includes our COLA, union contract increases, and the biggest one, which is the recruitment and retention incentive for police officers. The next item that contributed to this levy increase was adding public safety employees. So we're proposing to add one more police officer starting at the beginning of second quarter, and we're increasing hours for our police department records staff and community service officer positions. And finally, there were some increases in our insurance last year based on property values increasing. The value for our general liability insurance, those costs went up, and we're feeling that impact this year. And we're anticipating next year increases associated with insuring the lake walk and docks, as those have new and higher values than what was there or did not exist prior to that. If you're a visual person, maybe this is helpful for you to see a comparison from 24 to 25 in terms of where our revenue comes from. You'll see the biggest differences. I mean, these are fairly consistent year over year in terms of percentages. Biggest increase is in taxes, with some smaller increases in charges for services, but overall pretty consistent year over year. On the expenditure side of things, you'll see that the biggest increases in our departments, the main one being over $580,000 increase in our police department budget. Again, that's all associated with adding a position, increasing hours for part-time staff, and that officer recruitment and retention pay. I think it can be helpful to also think about what is the dynamic of valuation and taxes in the community more broadly. In 2024, we saw market value did continue to grow, although not as rapidly as we saw in the prior years. I think you would recognize that from a slightly lower attendance at the Board of Appeal and Equalization. We just didn't have quite the stark market value growth, but fairly consistent growth from new construction, as we've seen over a number of years. So we continue to see the benefit of that redevelopment in the community. Additionally, we, for the most part, the last several years, have continued to outpace Hennepin County in terms of our tax capacity growth. In nearly all areas, you'll see we didn't quite outpace them in apartment, but commercial, residential, and other properties, we were performing better than the county. The action tonight, I think, is important to put in context of, as the city council, you only have authority to set the city property tax levy. When folks get their property tax statements, it's combined school, county, city, and other taxing jurisdictions. On average, for Wayzata homeowners, the Wayzata property taxes, our local percentage, is about 19% of their total tax bill. And over time, I think this balance of investing in needed services and improvements from a city perspective while minimizing that impact on residents have resulted in that, compared to our peers, we have averaged levy increases below what they're seeing. So I think we're trying to strike that balance of investing where we need to invest, but not overdoing it. And so because of that, and because of our, strong performance as a community, strong valuations, we tend to have one of the lower tax rates of most of our peers. And even with a budgeted increase again next year, we're still going to be one of the lowest at 19.82%. If you put that in terms of dollars for a house, if you compared the same value home across different communities, if you have a lower tax rate, you would pay a lower amount in city taxes. So there's only a couple of communities in our comparison that are lower than us, so I think we're doing pretty good from that standpoint. But again, considering this in terms of real dollars, what could this mean to different homeowners in the community? So if their property value increased on average 5%, they would pay $182 more next year in city taxes than they did this year. If their property values remained flat, they'd pay about $67 more next year than they did this year. So that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of dollar impact. That's given in terms of the median value home in the community, which is just over $1 million. I also think it's important to put our decisions we make about taxes and impact on residents in context of what we heard in our community survey. It's a couple years old now, but we did ask them a question on, what do you think the value you get from your taxes is? And 85% of our residents said that they thought they got good or excellent value. And I think that's because the council's done a good job of, again, making smart investments, but not trying to overburden the residents either. So again, we've seen historically that our residents are happy with the value that they're getting from their taxes. I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you may have, but before you tonight are two separate motions and resolutions to certify that property tax levy and then actually approve the preliminary budget.
Thank you. So bring it back to council. You have any questions for city staff on either of these items? No? I don't really have questions because this has been the end of a very long process for all of us here. So we're pretty intimately familiar with this. But the thing that our citizens are probably most concerned about, the most evident to them, is property taxes. And in our budget here, there is a reflection on property tax. So if you are able to do so, could you comment about if we didn't add any police protection, and we're all in favor of that, there's good reasons for it, but if we didn't have that one item in our budget, do you have any idea what the property tax levy increase would be, if any?
If we didn't add the additional officer specifically,
Well, for the police department itself, if that was left flat, it would be about a flat budget, would it not?
it would be pretty close. Still some increase, but not as significant. But this budget, proposed recruitment and retention pay, additional part-time hours, and an additional staff person.
So my point in asking that question is really for the community, that we care about safety in Wayzata in every dimension, and it is clear that the police department needs our support to provide the safety that the community wants. And because of our commitment to safety, this is the consequences, is our budget goes up appropriately just for that. So with that, I'll bring it back. First, I'll entertain a motion to adopt Resolution 34-2024, certifying to the county auditor the preliminary property tax levy for taxes payable in 2025.
So moved, Mayor Pro Tem.
And a second?
Second.
Having been moved and seconded, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Move on to the next resolution, which is to adopt Resolution 35-2024, approving the preliminary 2025 budgets. I'll entertain a motion for that.
I'll make that motion.
And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, where are we here? So now I believe we are at the city manager's report. Deputy City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. I have just a brief update tonight, most of it just reminders of some upcoming events and important anniversaries. So the first is a reminder that James J. Hill Days is coming up this weekend, Friday through Sunday. I want to recognize the Chamber for pulling together a great event for another year. Some highlights of what the folks can expect this weekend: there will be a craft beer festival, movie on the Great Lawn, the carnival, street market, live music, and much, much more. The Chamber has a great event schedule on their website that folks can look at to get times. I would also highlight that the parade will be on Sunday from 3 to 4 right on Lake Street. So a lot of great stuff happening in town this weekend. In a couple of weeks, we will have the fire department pancake breakfast. That will be on Sunday, September 15th from 8 a.m. to noon. That will be here at the fire department. Folks can stop by for pancakes, French toast, participate in a raffle, stuff like that. So that's another great event coming up. And lastly, I do want to take this opportunity. It's an important time of year for us to remember some of our fallen officers who were killed in the line of duty in the police department. Unfortunately, we have 2 of those to recognize, both kind of at this time of year. August 31st marks the anniversary of the death of Sergeant J.W. Anderson, and September 8th marks the anniversary of the death of Officer Bill Matthews. So just please keep, their families in your hearts, and, remember their sacrifice and the service that they gave to the city of Wayzata. And that's all I have.
Thank you, and thanks for that reminder. It's good to be reminded of that. And with regard to the events, those are 2 of the highlights of Wayzata. I think, in my mind, at least, James J. Hill Days is like the premier event for Wayzata. So if you live in the city, please come. If you don't live in the city, please come. It'll be great. Do we have any remote comments? Anybody online that wants to make a comment?
We do not.
Okay. With that, last item is adjournment, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.